Welcome, everyone. My name is Heather Flinchado. I'm the Executive Director of the Architectural Heritage Center, and we are going to be talking a little bit about two really important buildings, the PSU owned Blackstone Hall and the Montgomery Court building. And both of these are on the PSU campus adjacent to the historic Portland Park blocks. I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started. I want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded so that other people can listen in as well. If you are not comfortable being recorded, please just turn your camera off and or let us know. We are excited to also have Fred Leeson here today, who writes the Building on History blog. And I want to thank Jan Dilge for also joining in kind of last minute, who has more knowledge as a PSU professor, and let me know about some interesting other resources to learn more about women's history that is so relevant to this story about the Montgomery Court building, also known as the Martha Washington. So I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, everybody can see my screen okay? Stuff? Okay. I can't see you all, so. I just want to thank you for joining us today to learn more about these buildings. I'm sure there are many more who have deep history about this, so feel free to, when we kind of get to a little break, I'm going to show a little clip of the film that Dana Plotz did. Not sure if she's here today, but she made this wonderful film, I think at the anniversary, was it the centennial anniversary, Jan, that the film was made?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you. So we'll show a little clip of that and then maybe we can chat a little bit, and then we'll have Fred Leeson talk a little bit about the other building, Blackstone Hall, that was designed and built by Sieg and Millman. So important history there. So first, I just want to let people know about the Architectural Heritage Center. Some people know about us. Some people say we're the best kept secret in Portland. And so we wanted to let people know that we are a resource center here for education, both our programs and our advocacy, our library, our resources, the gallery. We also have one of the largest collections of architectural artifacts in the country. Many of them are in our warehouse, but also we're put online this year for the first time ever. So we are here to empower people to discover and preserve Portland's historic and culturally significant places. And, that's about people and buildings. Sometimes they're really, magically beautiful, crafted buildings, and sometimes they're the most nondescript buildings, but something important happened there, or an important person. There's important stories of these buildings. So we consider ourselves the storytellers of the city. And we are here located right across the street from the new Literary Arts building, also a historic building, and Rutherford Co. So we're kind of the book block here at Grand and Alder on the east side. We hope you'll come see us. And so through our work, we work to help Portlanders understand and embrace preservation and reuse as a key component in creating equitable, livable, and sustainable communities. And part of that is reusing those existing buildings where we can. It's part of a more sustainable future. So we offer more than 80 walking tours a year to learn about these stories and the people and events behind these homes and buildings. We have 4 gallery spaces, and we also offer talks and events and advocacy for building reuse, density without demolition, and both the built and natural landscapes to foster greater preservation. So I want to let people know about an upcoming LGBTQ exhibit opening that's going to be happening about preservation and LGBTQ plus community that is very relevant and meaningful to us because our founders were gay and their story has not been as well told. So we hope you'll join us on July 10th. Mark your calendars for an exhibit opening as well. And then we'll have a new exhibit opening also tomorrow that is an online story map for Beatrice Kennedy that's going to be launching and made available. So stay tuned for a new exhibit about Beatrice Kennedy. It was an important advocate for race relations and racial justice in Portland. So stay tuned for that as well. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of these two important PSU historic residence halls that are proposed for demolition, removing approximately 200 units of existing housing. And we do have an online petition and more information on our website, more links to the video that I'll show a little clip of today, but also there's more than 1,000 people have signed our petition. There's a draft letter you can use as well. And if you want to write your own advocacy letter. So we're really concerned about the significant architectural, cultural, and women's history associated with these buildings, as well as the climate impacts. And both of these buildings really are deserving, not only eligible, but deserving of National Register designation. And so with PSU as our largest landowner in downtown, we kind of looked at what is the role and responsibility of our university as the largest landholder, that we've lost a lot of other historic buildings as PSU has been making way for new things to happen, but nothing has happened on many of those sites. So we've got quite a few other vacant parcels we're hoping that could be built upon instead. The building is really spectacular. Both, if you haven't seen this courtyard, this magical hidden courtyard kind of behind the building, it is a little oasis away from the fray of the city, and really, built by one of our most important architects in Portland. It has incredible details. It has not been maintained as well as it could be, but it is still in good shape from even just looking inside at the main lobby of the Montgomery Court building. As I mentioned, formerly known as the Martha Washington, when it was built by the Portland Women's Union. And the building was restored or had a seismic renovation in 2005. So it has had some of that seismic work done. There's more to do. But the significance of it also being designed by A.E. Doyle, who was one of Portland's most noted architects, and they call him often Portland's architect for his really significant contributions in architecture. But as Jan mentioned earlier today, Jan Dilge, she mentioned that, unfortunately it doesn't bear any naming or nomenclature on the building that it was designed and built by women for women. I mean, not all the design, but designed, built for women by women. And that is an important piece of the story that I don't think many people know. And while the building is significant from its architectural standpoint as an A.E. Doyle building, who designed the Central Library, U.S. Bank, and other really incredible buildings in Portland, its women's history is so notable. So I'm going to share just a little snippet of, and please tell me if you cannot hear the sound on here, but we've got a little video we're going to share. Can you hear the sound? No. Okay. Okay. Let me see if we can adjust that on our webinar. Kaylee, can you get into the Zoom and see if there's a little checkbox we can change to make sure we hear the sound? So why don't I go forward a little bit? Here, let's see, share computer sound. Let's see if we can do that one. There we go. Let's try it. Let me try that. Let's see if that works.
1904.
Does that work?
And this is Anna Lewis Mann, who donated much of the property on which the various homes were built, including the Martha Washington.
By 1911, the Union acquired the quarter block at the corner of 10th and Montgomery for the site of their new boarding house through the generosity of Mrs. Mann, who provided, from various reports, a sum of between $14,000 or $15,000 towards the purchase price. However, $75,000 was still needed to complete the project, so fundraising began. Mrs. Elliott R. Corbett, then the president of the union, along with her finance committee, set off to get contributions from friends to start the new building fund. A.E. Doyle was chosen as the architect, and soon plans were underway. At the union's 25th annual meeting, they had paid off all of their debt and had a balance in the treasury, which made the fundraising easier for the new project. Then a fire at Anna Lewis Hall in 1916 made the new building even more of a necessity. The superintendent of the house had detected the odor of smoke but could not discover the reason for it. She sent for the fire department to come and investigate, and they discovered the roof on fire. It appeared to have been started by a skyrocket set off on the 4th of July.
The country was becoming a much more urban nation, and as jobs on the farm and family farms couldn't support the family anymore, there was much more migration of young women and men into cities. And for women, this was a fairly new experience. And because women weren't in the workforce in ways that they had been before, there were all kinds of changes that were necessitated: housing, wages, types of jobs that they were allowed to work at or not work at.
The union's first president, Mrs. Burrell, had left a gift of $10,000 that was used towards the new building, which was now being called the Martha Washington. Mrs. Corbett and her finance committee were successful in raising $35,000 through a plea to the public, and $30,000 was borrowed from Penn Mutual. The cornerstone was laid on January 29, 1917, in wet falling snow. In the small group that braved the storm were a number of Portland's best-known women. A metal box containing the records of the Union and a few other documents were placed in the stone. President and Mrs. Comstock sealed the box with a trowel of mortar. The 4-story Martha Washington Hotel for self-supporting women opened on October 21, 1917, as home to 90 female boarders, with more classrooms, common areas, and even a gymnasium. The dedication and the 30th anniversary of the Union were celebrated during a reception in the hotel's living room. Mrs. Piddock and Mrs. Mann were front and center, enjoying the Union's accomplishment.
Because of the influx of young single women into cities, places like the Martha Washington that accommodated only women tenants were very welcome. They had affordable rents. They were safe, congenial places for these young women to live with other women who were sharing their experiences. And so it was a real boon when the Martha Washington opened in 1917. And this was a very central location, and so it was easy for young women to go to work and do the kinds of recreation that they might want to do outside of work on their weekends.
The new location also brought everything new with it. New furnishings all the way down to the pillowcases, a new set of rules for the residents, and even the housekeeping staff had new requirements. By 1920, the Martha Washington Hotel housed 95 women, and more than 200 women's names appeared on a waiting list. While the Union now owned the new Martha at 10th and Montgomery, they still owned the old home at 15th and Flanders and 2 lots on West Main Street, another gift from Mrs. Mann. This caused a strain on their finances, but by 1922, when Anna Lewis Hall was finally sold, the proceeds eased the Union's financial outlook.
By 1924, the waiting list for women to board here was so extensive that they expanded and added an annex that would then allow another 170 women boarders to live here. One of the changes that happened for women really was World War I. And during that time, although to a lesser degree than World War II, men went off to war, women stepped into jobs that they had not previously held. And that trend continued through the 20s and into the early 30s. The Depression played a role in that as well. And so where women might have just had clerical jobs or been domestics, they really branched out into a broader range of industrial and office jobs.
At the 50th anniversary of the Union, celebrated in 1937, the women presented a comparison of the residence and how they had operated for the past 50 years. Not only had the occupations changed, but the educational backgrounds from the first residents, who had had very limited schooling, now had college degrees, and even a number held masters and PhDs. They even looked at the food service over the years and noted the ignorance of nutrition back in the later 1800s, the absence of vegetables except for potatoes, and it seemed rhubarb was the only fruit listed. There had been a very high starch content in the early menus. On the 50th anniversary, the women of the Union also celebrated that the Martha Washington was once again entirely free of debt.
I met Helen because she was volunteering with us. She was very involved in a church, and they made knit items for our clients. Many of the women who were knitting were older, and it was very important for them to be knitting for other women. And she had heard and read in the newsletter that I was doing a lot of advocacy work and really trying to persuade the county to open the Martha Washington again, this beautiful, precious building, this gem. And she shared with me, well, Susan, I lived at the Martha Washington when I first moved to Portland. And so she told me her story, and I was just so fascinated by this. She was born in 1915. She lived in a very small town in eastern Oregon, and the Martha Washington was considered a safe and genteel place for a young woman coming to Portland, finding her way to live. And her parents brought her to town, and it was 1937, and so she lived at the Martha Washington. She had trained as a secretary and a bookkeeper, and she worked in a downtown firm for a number of years until she met her husband and married. But it was so fascinating to me, I've been working in this field since 1985, to meet someone so many years later after I'd started working and watch the Martha Washington go through so many transformations, to meet a person who started out her life as a single woman, and this was the first place that she lived outside of her parents' home.
The Martha Washington Hotel's tenancy grew or dwindled as each decade brought new challenges and changes, depending largely on the political and world events of the time. During the Great Depression, the rents were lowered and rules were loosened in order to allow older women to live there. During World War II, the Martha Washington Hotel was home to war workers, and women over the age of 30 were asked to leave. After the war ended, the national emphasis was on women leaving their jobs to return home and become wives and mothers. The Martha reiterated this theme by stressing that its tenants were welcome to stay until they were married. By the early 40s, the hotel registry reflected a good number of residents from Oregon, but also continued to get an influx from out of state as well. The hotel served as a location in 1947 of the Union's 60th anniversary. The women were always ensuring that the hotel had an updated brochure and made great efforts to keep the quality of the hotel in tip-top condition. This was an ongoing job for the household committee, and keeping it to a high standard was no easy task. 1953 found 13 women who had come to look upon Martha as their home. There was such a demand for boarding that on January 26, 1953, the Union had to make a motion and draft a legal letter to ask the older women to vacate. New rules were put in place that the age limits were to be from 18 to 20 years old, with a time limit of 3 years occupancy, and a 1-year extension for a student completing a college course. They reviewed the many reports up to this time that all stressed the word young and the term girls. In 1954, a new Martha was once again presented to the public with a marketing brochure and an open house.
I lived in the Martha Washington in 1965, and I had moved here from Utah. I didn't know anyone, and I had heard about it before I came, and I had to wait 3 months to get in. And then at last when I got in, it was great because all of a sudden I had all these friends, and there's 5 of us who became lifelong friends. We're like sisters. Some of the things I liked about the Martha was it was affordable. like $80 a month at the time I was there. I could walk to work. They served breakfast and lunch. And then we just always had a social calendar because of our friends. Yes, when we were living there in 1965, so one of the fun things was there was a group of women who were at the desk, and they were the buffer, or they would, if someone came to visit, they would call us in our rooms. And sometimes they would just be saviors to us because a salesman may have approached us and made us have an appointment, and the women would sort of get rid of them for us, and so we felt safe. We knew that they'd take care of us if someone was kind of taking advantage of us.
The 1960s brought a new look to the city as well as the Martha. And even though the skirt lengths were much shorter, the residents were still known as wholesome girls. The residents created a list of what they liked about the Martha and shared it with the union. But the 60s also brought about a culture of change. Young women were much more independent, and the Martha still had a rule about no men upstairs. In the April report of 1967, spring had sprung, with the girls breaking the rules by bringing male guests upstairs and having water fights.
By 1969, Portland State was expanding its campus, and the Martha Washington was sitting right in the middle of the places that they wanted to expand, and they needed room for their own students to have lodging. And so the Portland Women's Union began to seek a new home, which they found at 11th and Main in what was originally called the Campbell Court Hotel. It had been a residential hotel built by Jean Campbell and run by her for many years.
With the Portland Development Commission's purchase of the Martha for Portland State University to use for dorms, Martha was on the move. The now new Martha opened its doors at the beginning of 1970. New marketing materials were once again created to show off its beautiful features, and a new ad was created and placed in the paper touting the modern downtown appeal and the low rates, from $100 to $120 with meals and many amenities. There was a beautiful sitting room, outside courtyard, and a very nice dining room.
I'm going to pause right there. What I wanted to let people know is, you can watch the whole video on our website. There's a lot more history about the Portland Women's Union, a whole background about, how they were also providing access to learning new skills, helping even some women get access to other economic uplift, and being able to move towards even developing other incomes that they could, maybe get out of a situation that was unsafe for them. And, so
this is part of the Portland Women's.
Sorry about that. And so I wanted to let people know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But you can find out more history about it, and we'll talk a little bit more about what are some other alternatives. I appreciate we have a developer on here. We have John Russell, so and who has also worked on many historic buildings, and have Paul Falsetto has worked on adaptive reuse of other historic buildings, and so we'll have a little conversation about that. But I want to give a few minutes to Fred Leeson, who's here with us today, to also talk about the Blackstone apartments. And then I want to let people know we're going to meet up on Saturday at the buildings if people would like to take a walk and look at the buildings and talk more about some advocacy. So, Fred, are you able to see these? Okay, great.
I am here and ready to go.
Okay, great. Thank you, Fred. And Fred has a wonderful blog called Building on History that you often see connected with the Architectural Heritage Center's newsletters.
Although these two buildings in Jeopardy were built 13 years apart, they were really a result of the same context. As the next slide will show, Portland was going through an explosive period of growth from 1900 to 1930. Housing was in a tremendous shortage. You can see that the number of apartment houses rose dramatically between 1910 and 1970. while the young women desperately needed housing and found some at the Martha Washington. All sorts of other people needed housing too, and apartments were an interesting option. The next slide shows some of the primary designers. First on our list is Elmer Feig, and I've heard his name pronounced both ways, both Feig or Feig, and I don't know which is correct. Very interesting man that had a lasting impact and a sort of one of Portland's least known designers with a huge impact. From the late 20s into the early 30s, designed 33 buildings, mostly apartments, I believe 31 apartment houses. Elmer was a graduate of the University of Oregon in architecture, but was never licensed as an architect. And never deceived anybody, described himself as a designer. He had worked for the city of Portland for 5 years, from 22 to 1927, as a building plans examiner before starting his own building. The Blackstone, as you'll see on the next slide, was built in 1930. Some people call it Egyptian architecture, although I don't really think it is. It has these Egyptian details. King Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered in Egypt, I believe, in 1922. And Elmer gathered some of these details. Here you can see the Tutankhamun. The winged horse was also a common Egyptian symbol. The developer of this building was Harry Middleman, who cooperated or worked with Feig on several apartment buildings. We'll see another one of them shortly. Middleman was a very successful entrepreneur, built a whole lot of apartments, owned them and managed them, and did very, very well until the Depression hit in about 1932 or 33. Middleman then got out of the apartment business and developed banks. And his final bank was the 15-story Bank of California that was built, I believe, in the 1980s. The entry to the Blackstone shows more of these, the Tutankhamun design elements. Feig also liked the decorative tile that shows up in many of his buildings, and this is the entrance. Next slide. This is another building, the Adele Manor, sometimes called the Adele Court, that Feig designed on Vista Avenue. This was another Harry Middleman project. Harry Middleman liked to name buildings for his relatives, and Adele was a daughter. This was in 1928, very early in Feig's design. Other architects also built the Jean Manor. Another Middleman project, the Jean Manor. Jean was Middleman's wife. In 1928, Elmer also designed this home in Irvington neighborhood for Harry Middleman. Next. Elmer, interesting designer. We're going to see 2 or 3 of his other interesting buildings here. He did 3 buildings that had medieval turrets. This is the most elaborate one, or the turrets are the most elaborate. Whether these would survive in an earthquake is another question. As busy as Elmer was, I don't think you can really call him a cookie cutter designer, in that a lot of his buildings were different. He did do 3 that were very similar, or 2 others that were similar to this one, but they all had different touches. Next. Here's another one of his designs. He did a number of buildings that had these deep recessed entrances, which, as you can tell, allowed the windows along those recesses that have some air and a little bit of fresh air. Unfortunately, the fire escapes had to be added later. I think they detract somewhat from Elmer's design. Several of his buildings, apartments, are in Northwest Portland. There's almost kind of an Elmer Feig neighborhood. Next slide. Here's the entrance, the recessed entrance, and you can see his design motifs as he pursued them. Next. There are a number of reasons that I would list that why we should save the Blackstone rather than tear it down. Portland needs more housing now. We need it desperately. Saving existing houses provides those units faster than demolishing, building anew. I don't believe that PSU has any plan right now for what they would put in the Blackstone other than they would lose the 40 units that are already there. Interesting to me that the Blackstone provides a historic backdrop to the South Park blocks, and we had to struggle valiantly to get the South Park blocks listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Although the Blackstone is not itself a designated landmark, it certainly could be, and it should be, and it is a part of the context that helps make the South Park blocks as attractive as they always are. And I think Faig's designs for all of his buildings deserve to be respected for their craftsmanship and materials. And as Heather knows better than I do, that the rehabilitation is less damaging environmentally than tearing down and building anew. That's the end of my pitch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. I appreciate you sharing a little perspective. You know, I wanted to give a little bit of a climate perspective on this as well. And I want to give a shout out to Lauren Zimmerman, who's here from the city, also with background on, oh, she may have actually just had to pop off, but Lauren Zimmerman also works on the residential deconstruction side. And I know the city is looking at a commercial deconstruction approach. And so in, you know, gathering data about the carbon impacts of that, you know, she was able to help us look at some of the actual carbon emission impacts of this, which is really significant. So, you know, not only do more than 1,000 people agree that this is a serious concern, we're also very concerned about this, not just from an architectural heritage and women's history concern, but also about the climate impact, that there would really be a significant savings of, you know, if you save sort of the core of the building shell, the outside of it, that, you know, in a retrofit, you would be saving 72 to 89% of the carbon emissions versus building new. And combined, that this is equivalent to 5 million pounds of coal being burned. So, you know, not one, but two of these important buildings, when PSU has other vacant land available. They've torn down, or they're about to tear down the last two of about 10 buildings proposed that they had proposed for demolition. Many of these were eligible for the National Register that were not put on there. We lost the Blackstone Hall. I'm sorry, we lost Parkway Manor recently, which was also significant on the park blocks. And so it's not really helping us move forward with revitalizing our city when we keep ending up with, you know, more of these important buildings being torn down and then just left vacant. We're also very concerned about losing the significant amount of housing when we have a housing crisis. We should be using the resources we have. Sure, we can be building new and doing urban infill, but it is a significant delay to tear buildings down when they can be reused right now. And in a climate crisis, we just don't have the time to waste in the decisions we make about investing in our existing buildings first. Many other, like England has a retrofit first approach. We need an approach like that too. We don't always have all the tools that we could be using, but there are some creative strategies. Sure, we would love to have a rehab tax credit that 39 other states have. That is a significant tool that could be used. I want to thank Restore Oregon for their partnership also on getting a new special assessment passed for commercial buildings that can also provide more resources and support, but a rehab tax credit is what we need, and maybe something like a adaptive reuse ordinance. But We think that there are some other strategies PSU could be using. For example, PSU could be, in addition to, not selling it as if this is what is proposed. This was a student-generated idea, but there is not a proposal, my understanding, for what is going to happen here, according to Lauren Zimmerman. But we think that there could be some other creative approaches, like a lend-lease strategy could be something that some developers have suggested, where you could, rehabilitate and modernize these buildings without burdening the university's budget. So PSU could perhaps sell the buildings to a developer. Sometimes they can sell a building to a developer for $1 and then lease it back for 30 years. But we could require National Registry listing. So that would give them tools that PSU does not have as a nonprofit, so that, as an institution, they don't have the same ability to leverage tax credits the same way that a developer could use that and access the 20% federal tax credits. If they put it on the National Registry list, they could also potentially sell their floor area ratio, their FAR, additional development space above the building. They could also, if they made it low-income housing, they could get low-income tax credits. So there are other financial scenarios that are not necessarily always available to a university, but could be available with a preservation mindset. And I wanted to see if we have Paul Falsetto still here.
I am, Heather.
Hey, Paul, thanks for joining us. I'm just wondering if you might be open to speaking a little bit about just what are some other ways that, or other projects you might suggest that are good examples that where they've been innovative.
Sure, I can talk to that.
Strategies.
If you don't mind, I might share my screen, so I might have to send a request.
Let me make that possible for you. And I will stop sharing my screen too.
Okay, we had a meeting, and let me know if you can see my screen.
Not yet.
Take that out of the way. The Portland Historic Landmarks Commission had a meeting, and Heather talked to that, and this was one of the issues. And there's an issue I kind of want to bring up that I brought up at that meeting, which is, and on the right you can see the map of the PSU campus. Now, the PSU campus is fairly new. PSU itself at this location dates back to the 40s. So this was a Portland neighborhood before that. And as I zoom in, the park blocks, of course, are kind of the central part of PSU, terminates at the north with Market Street. And right here in the center are the two buildings that we're talking about, Montgomery Building and Blackstone. And you can tell that they're right in the heart of the campus, which I think is quite neat, that there's historic buildings that predate the campus in the heart of the campus. And it's not just those two, but the SBH here is the Simon Benson House, which was moved. The bird's eye on the left kind of highlight the buildings and the Simon Benson House. It's right across from the Student Memorial Union, immediately adjacent to Millar Library. So there is something really intriguing to have historic buildings in the heart of this campus as a callback to what the site used to be. And the fact that we just kind of cycle through some of these images here, I think this is a key one, that the Simon Benson House really is a wonderful introduction to the campus as you move from north to south. And our two historic buildings we're talking about provide really a good backdrop to this historic property that was moved here. And I think a 6-story building that's probably going to be a half a block building maybe wouldn't provide such a amenable context for this historic building. So I think it's really important to remember that it's not just two new buildings or two historic buildings, but in essence with Simon Benson, it's 3. And the site itself is a historic callback as well. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I just kind of wanted to mention that to provide a little bit more context. there are plenty of good examples of how to upgrade these buildings, and I've worked on a number of them in which they were historic hotels or apartments that were converted to a modern use apartment. And it's of interest to me that Montgomery Court's already had a seismic upgrade, not that long ago, 20 years ago, but I'd be interested in the sort of work that was done there. I know that PSU talks about accessibility being an issue, and these buildings can be made accessible. And the actions range from easy to ingenious on how you can do that. The key thing is to get people from the public right away into the building, ideally on the first floor, and then have them communicate through the various floors of the building via an elevator. And I think there might be an elevator in there already. These buildings are buildings that can be workable. I think that they provide an interesting context. I was reading some of the chat, and we have a person who actually stayed in the buildings when she was doing her college work, and found it to be really kind of a neat experience. And quite frankly, if you see the historic buildings next to that proposed design, and I know it's not the final design, you can see how much of a loss it would be, a net loss, to lose two beautiful historic buildings done by very good, very, very talented architects to a new building that doesn't quite have nearly that amount of interest or intrigue or sparkle put into it. Heather, anything else you would like me to?
Well, I was wondering thank you. And I appreciate seeing the visual where you can see how close it is to the park blocks and what an important connection that is too. It's also part of the Walk of Heroines, which I just learned about from Jan Dilge. There's only one building named after a woman on campus, is my understanding. And, it's too bad that there is not a sign that on the existing Montgomery, it's only a sign for a man. It'd be nice to have more of that story told. What I was going to ask you about was maybe some other projects that are good examples of. Is it the Woodlark that was a major retrofit?
Right. So the Woodlark's right in the Midtown blocks in downtown Portland, and it involved actually a couple buildings that they were able to unify and take advantage of an elevator that could serve both buildings. I don't know if that's entirely needed here. The buildings are standalone, but the Woodlark's a good example. When I did some work with Carlton Hart Architecture through the pandemic on the Joyce apartments, is what we called it. It was the Joyce Hotel. And so that was converting a business class hotel into single resident occupancy units. It was a total redo. So it took about a year plus in construction, but we retained the amount of rooms in that space. You had a full seismic upgrade, you had full accessibility and the energy upgrades. And this is something I kind of want to highlight, that a great study was done and sponsored by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And Ralph Doyle was one of the leaders of that. And this was done maybe 10 years ago. And it compared historic or existing buildings with new buildings as far as their energy efficiency goes and their effect on the environment. And if you take an existing building and you compare it directly to a new building, as far as its energy use, the new building will eventually catch up and overtake the existing building. But if you look at carbon usage, the existing building was done typically, and let's use our two buildings as an example, they were done at a time where you had much less gasoline engined construction equipment building it. So its carbon is embedded now, but its carbon when it was built was very low. So if you're trying to compare that with how buildings are done now, we would extend a lot more carbon into the atmosphere to build the buildings, plus the demolition of the existing buildings would be added to that. And Ralph's study found that if you compare a historic building that has had energy retrofits to a new building, even if it's the highest level of energy efficiency, and you compare them on a chart with energy use and carbon, the new building will never catch up with the historic building. It'll never catch up because that historic building would have been upgraded as far as its energy use goes. And its carbon, as I mentioned, is extraordinarily low compared to the new building. So, you know, those things I think have to be kept in mind for a university that has done some really sustainable type buildings on campus. Keeping these two buildings would be the most sustainable thing they could ever do. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. And thank you, Paul. I think you're highlighting some really important points. There are lessons to be taken from some of these other projects, you know, like connecting those two buildings on the Woodlark, you know, how might we take advantage of, you know, some other creative design strategies that could support their accessibility. You know, there could even be opportunities to build above the Montgomery Court building, you know, to add additional stories if you were doing a seismic upgrade process. You know, you could get additional density in there. But we also have other vacant lots that PSU has available right now. There are 5 other properties that they have torn down buildings and built nothing on. So there's a couple different issues. You know, we want to support PSU to be a leader. We want to support a win-win solution for them. You know, PSU does not have great resources for maintaining their buildings. So it tends to be easier to tear them down than to bond for new money to build new buildings. But what is PSU's responsibility and role here to be part of the solution for revitalizing our city? What we're seeing is other cities are leveraging their historic buildings as part of their economic revitalization. The more that we genericize our city, the more that we lose some of our greatest assets that distinguish us in this place. And we also lose our connection to those important cultural stories, like the ones at the Martha Washington. And we didn't really show the beginning part, which kind of leads up and tells you more about the Portland Women's Union. But I think that there's that carbon and climate story is also significant. So we've got our architectural story, our economic, you know, revitalization, our housing issues, that this is not helping us necessarily. Just by replacing it, we can be building new housing and keeping that housing that we already have. It takes a long time to build. But also, you know, our analysis shows that these buildings may never overtake the carbon emissions equaling out, even if they build a building at 30% more energy efficient, because as the grid gets cleaner, you know, it may never overtake the impact of that. But what we do right now is what's critical. So I think that there's some, you know, there's some important pieces to be reminded about, you know, that this is really such a significant opportunity for PSU to do the right thing. And how can we support them with some creative solutions? And so I want to encourage people to join this conversation. We have an advocacy committee. Our chair of our advocacy committee is here today. Peggy Moretti is here. And I want to thank Peggy also, who's on our Landmarks Commission, because Landmarks also wrote a letter of concern to the city. You know, this is a bigger issue than just about these two buildings. PSU is, as the significant landholder in downtown and significant housing owner, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, this is a statewide issue too, how this affects housing. And so, you know, what are our strategies here? Yes, there is an $85 million proposal for a new building, but is this really contributing to, you know, the story of our city and the identity of our city in a way that is, you know, as is the story we want to tell? So we want to encourage people to sign the petition, and you can join us for a walk and talk about the building on Saturday at 1 o'clock. We're going to meet at Blackstone Hall, and then we'll go to the courtyard and we can have a conversation as well. But I also want to encourage you to, you know, to talk now together. So I'm going to stop sharing and just want to encourage us to, you know, to talk as a group also about other ideas or questions that people might have. I'm wondering, maybe I'll ask Peggy as our advocacy chair, just any thoughts on from the landmarks perspective.
Thank you. Well, I think you've made all the points here that the Landmarks Commission made in our letter addressed to the university president, and I kind of come back to, we've got the sustainability question, the cultural heritage, the importance of the cultural heritage, and there aren't a whole lot of places in Portland that do celebrate women's history the way the Martha Washington does. But then one of the things I just keep scratching my head over is why would you tear down 200 units of housing when you've got, it's going to take a long time to replace when you already have all that vacant land. I'm trying to see logic here, and I guess we need to, this is me speaking personally, I'm not representing the Landmarks Commission here, I want to be clear on that. I have to be careful as a public entity, the commission is, that I just think we can all ask PSU to press the pause button and please explore this idea of that lend-lease option. There are options I am confident they have not explored, because if they had explored them, I don't think they'd be doing what they're doing. So, I always want to assume that people's heads and hearts are, they're doing the best they can with all kinds of different things, pressures on them. But if we could all collectively in our communication and outreach, hopefully following up on this, just ask them, please press the pause button and allow us to link arms with them in a supportive way and explore alternatives. Because I think the win-win is restoration and reuse, and also start your new housing build on the vacant land you already have, and there's a lot of it. So I guess that's how I would boil things down right now. It's unfortunate that the Landmarks Commission had no authority to try to intervene in any other way than just to advocate, because these places were not officially designated as historic. So that also points out to us that we should be alert to what are the next at-risk, really significant places, and what can we do to make sure they do receive designation and landmarking, so that there's a better opportunity to discuss alternatives to demolition for not only these buildings, but a number of other ones around our city. So those are my thoughts for now. Oh, and if you are interested in joining the Advocacy Committee, we are welcoming new members, and you can reach out to the AHC and we'll connect and have a conversation about that. But we are working to really ramp up our proactive and constructive engagement on all sorts of issues around town.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, Peggy, and shout out for our committee. I see Denise has her hand up. Thank you, Denise McGriff.
Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Denise McGriff. I'm past president of the Bosco Milligan Foundation. I'm also a National Trust Advisor representing the state of Oregon. And I think something that we should bear in mind is that we do not want PSU to go down the path of Emmanuel Hospital. As you know, in the paper recently, they finally, are ponying up some money to the descendants of homes and businesses of people that they tore down, things that they tore down years and years ago. We can't keep repeating that mistake. And PSU has they're right on the precipice of making that same mistake again, and doing something that is going to be harmful to our community, not only for today, but decades in the future. And we don't want to do that. And I know that we don't want to necessarily shame them, but they cannot continue to rest on the laurels of the fact that they and PDC saved the Simon Benson house. I mean, thank you very much for doing that. I worked on that project when I worked at PDC, but we're moving on to a new day now, and they need to really be responsible, not just to themselves. And I guess, Heather, did they have some sort of a master plan, or is this just like doing whatever they want to do?
Well, I might call on Michael Rice. He's on our advocacy committee. I know, Michael, you did a little bit of research. You might know more than I do.
Thank you. There's some very, and I don't have everything in front of me, but yes, there are some planning documents at PSU, but they're policy statements. They do not directly inventory the physical resources and proposals for the change and growth of the campus. But because I'll just throw in, because those policies are there on the record, to me, as we continue to advocate with the PSU administration, with President Cudd, those are all points that can be should be reminded of. And then the other recent activity at PSU, and some of you may be familiar with it, is they're engaging in what is called placemaking. And about 3-4 weeks ago, they had almost a full day public event about looking at the physical and urban design character of major parts of the campus to improve the placemaking character. How is this how does this work for the students circulating among the different parts of the campus? And at the introduction to that placemaking event, President Cudd spoke to the group and referred very specifically to her own experience at the University of Pittsburgh, where an important part of the campus was refurbished as part of the setting for the Tower of Learning. Okay. And the other comment that President Cudd offered was experience at Boston University, where the university engaged directly with the city and development interests on upgrading Kenmore Square, an important crossroads in downtown Boston. I know it well from many years ago, to improve the physical and place-making character of those institutions. And I heard her say it. I thanked her for it. And I wrote her a letter of advocacy about 2 weeks ago, and I showed that back to her. I hope all the things we've been hearing today about budget and climate and the right alternatives. I hope she and her advisors are paying attention.
I appreciate that, Michael. And I just put a link in the chat to where you can find more information on our website, both the petition, the full video I shared, a draft advocacy letter. I can stay just a few minutes after if people would like to talk a little more. I want to also just invite John Russell's here from Russell Development. So John, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share, also just someone who's done a lot of work with historic buildings that has been meaningful in our city. You're still on mute if you want to share anything.
Well, I have a lot to share, but there's no time. But to follow on what Michael was saying, the whole idea of placemaking was my idea years ago, and I pushed and pushed and pushed, and finally PSU hired Don Stastny to do a design competition, and the winner was Hannah Barrietti. But it's just beginning. But it was started because of my frustration as a neighbor of PSU that the campus was a random collection of buildings and vacant lots. It was not a campus that you'd be proud of. So they're aware that lots needs to be done, and they're sensitive to it. But the placemaking just really hasn't gotten off the ground yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up about the vacant lots. And I put a link in the chat also to an image that a student had shared with us that was also, I think, very telling about what PSU has built or not built and what they've demolished. And so that image, I think, is also really telling. And I have not vetted this image, but this was a PSU student, and this is a 1970s planned demolition of historic buildings that are on the campus. And they, of the 10 buildings that they've had, you know, they've demolished 5 of them and built nothing on. So this seems to be a pattern, and we don't want that to be the pattern for PSU. We want them to be able to be supported, to be investing in shared goals. I appreciated that somebody also put a link in the chat also about, or a comment in the chat about PSU needs to be aligning with student values, and part of that is sustainability. So thank you for bringing that up, and you know, I think that's also something I think Brad, as a retired architect, commented on too. Brad, you mentioned, you know, just the connection that you have with those buildings, and that also something that alumni, I think, associate their experiences and also will continue to contribute to PSU when they maintain that connection. So these are pieces that distinguish PSU among others with an urban campus that many people, whether they're students or not, really connect with these buildings as part of our city, and they predate Portland. I think, Paul, you brought that up, that these predate Portland State's taking over of this campus. And so this is an important link with our past and our city too. So we'd love to support PSU on some creative solution. I love Peggy's, like, let's just PSU push the pause. So I think that's what we need to be doing. And I want to encourage people to join with us for a further conversation on Saturday at 1 o'clock. We're going to meet at the Blackstone Hall and then walk behind the pathway right adjacent to the side of it and meet and gather in the courtyard. So I really appreciate anybody. Feel free to bring a sign if you want to. If you're feeling ready to protest, you know, make your own sign or express your love for these buildings. I know sometimes people do heart bombing when they love a place. They might bring their big hearts. So we're going to be talking at our advocacy committee meeting today. We will send you a copy of our PSU advocacy letter for your reference. And we want to encourage, you know, any developers or others to, you know, going to get involved in this conversation with PSU and bring them to the table to say, how can we help them do the right thing? How could they be the hero in this story? That they could be leaders in preserving important historic and cultural heritage. They can be, you know, modeling a sustainable path forward, reinvesting in the economic vitality of our city. And, you know, we really want to be partners in their success and retaining important housing right now as we make our plans forward. So I want to thank all of you for being here today and for learning a little bit about the Architectural Heritage Center. If you haven't already, want to invite you to become a member or just to join our newsletter. We've got a couple, I just want to make a couple announcements before we pop off that we have, you know, some advocacy priorities here. If you want to learn about, you know, really we need a state rehab tax credit. We need those incentives and tools for adaptive density. We have just acquired the giant model of downtown Portland. If you haven't seen it, it is very compelling, 18 feet long. And we used to look at the whole. We used to look at, you know, anytime a new development was planned, you had to make a mini model and put it into the big model to look at how it all worked in context. This is something that's very important that we used to do and we need to be doing again. And we're going to be doing more of that. We're bringing a lot more of these important conversations to the forefront, working to foster the next generation of preservationists and expanding design literacy and the sort of unintended consequences sometimes that happen when we're not thinking more broadly about these. So want to invite people to, we're having a big 2-day design charrette that's coming up Friday, June 27th and Saturday, June 28th. There'll be public pinup sessions where you can see the results, because we're looking at the Central City 2050 design charrette. And then there'll be a reception on Saturday, June 28th from 5:30 to 7. You can sign up on our website at visitahc.org/design charrette. I know Paul's going to be joining us as one of the designers. Thank you so much. And that you can subscribe to our newsletter, join a committee, or support our initiatives, and you can follow us. So I just want to thank you all so much for being here today, and we will follow up with a couple links for you. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.